I've made another stupid car purchase. Say hello to this 2005 5-cylinder Volvo S40 that I got for about 700 euros. Which sounds pretty good, but it definitely has its problems and needs a lot of work and new parts, as we're going to find out more about as the video progresses. Right away, the biggest issue right now is that the heat in the cabin is non-existent, which makes driving in the winter practically impossible. The windows fogs up immediately, and every time I've driven the car I've needed to preheat it and clean the windows. And then you can drive for about another 10 minutes. Now, the engine comes up to temperature, but the hoses leading to the heater core inside of the car feels pretty cold. One of them is lukewarm at best.
Oh yeah, the oil is super low. It's way below the minimum mark. The minimum mark is here and the oil level is here. So yeah, and it looks pretty old and nasty. Yeah, that wasn't very nice to see at all. Probably this car has been pretty neglected in its previous life. So yeah, definitely due for an oil change. Coolant, do we have anything there? So we have fluid in there at least, but it looks completely transparent. I don't know how it comes across from the camera, but when I looked inside it, it looked completely transparent. It hasn't frozen, so it's not just straight water at least, but it's definitely the wrong kind of coolant in there. Just go with the Volvo original blue coolant and you're good to go. So but I'll most likely need to change the coolant anyways when I'm dealing with the heater issue, when we're gonna tackle that pretty soon here. I'm probably going to flush the entire heater core inside of the car, so I'm gonna have to replace the coolant anyways. And of course I will go with the Volvo original fluid. Oh wow, the brake fluid is pretty much completely black. Not very nice to see, so I'll definitely do a complete brake flush. The auxiliary belt seems pretty old. I can even see a dry crack in it, so definitely need to replace the auxiliary belt along with the tensioner. Let's pull off the cam belt cover and see how that looks. I mean, the timing belt looks pretty good as far as I can see right now at least, but it's only like 1.5 years left of the service interval, the recommended service interval of changing the timing belt. So it might not be a bad idea to do a complete timing belt job with a new timing belt, pulleys, tensioner, water pump, and all of that good stuff. Actually, when looking closer, it might seem that we have an oil leak coming from one or both of the cam pulleys, which is not very nice, but that will be the perfect opportunity to take care of that if we're doing a timing belt job. Other than that, I can't see anything super obvious just by looking at everything from the top here, other than that the car seems to be super neglected, so it'll definitely be a lot of things that we could do in here. All right, next thing, let's hook up my generic scan tool to the car and see what we find. Later, a friend of mine is coming by with his Volvo Vida system, so Volvo's own diagnostic tool. That will be really interesting to connect the car to that. But first of all, let's connect this one and see what we find. All right, so I did a full scan of all of the car's module, at least the ones that this tool can find. And as we can see, we got quite a few things that the car is not happy about. A lot of these error codes are pretty random and could be due to just like a low battery or something like that. But the ones I'm most interested of are obviously the ones regarding the ECM, ABS, we'll have a look at that, and also the climate control module, because we have no heat in the car. So I'll definitely look into those first and see what they are about. Also the parking assist, we even have a message on the dashboard, so I'll look into that as well. So let's see what they are all about. So clicking on the ECM, we got outside temperature sensor. Obviously that's faulty, we can just tell by looking at the dashboard. Outside temperature sensor, faulty signal, that's related to that. And then air conditioning pressure sensor. So we'll have to look into that as well. Anti-block system. Let's see what that is about. Right front wheel sensor signal missing. That is strange. That should illuminate an ABS light on the dashboard. So I'll have to see about that. That is really weird. If a signal is missing from the right wheel front sensor, should definitely create a warning light. Electric power steering, power supply too low, that's nothing to worry about. And then we have the climate control module. And as we can see right here, right temperature, damper motor, no communication. That is a really interesting fault code, which definitely points us at the right direction.
The inspection continues, so let's get the car up in the air and remove the wheels and the belly pan.
I absolutely hate these chrome covered wheel nuts. If you search for swollen lug nuts, you will find why. But these seem to be in fairly okay condition, at least the threads. So beyond the things that I've already mentioned, I found a couple of more things when looking underneath the car and along the sides and on the chassis. So let me walk you through them real quick. So we got a leaking inner drive axle boot. This is quite urgent, I would say. So I've already ordered a new boot and we're gonna fix that in this video. Both of the front shocks are leaking oil. The left front anti-roll bar link has a lot of play to it, so I'm gonna go ahead and replace both in the front. And as we can see, we do have an active oil leak. It does seem to come mainly from the front main seal. It might also come from the camshaft seals, but yeah, it'll be the perfect opportunity to tackle that if I do a timing belt job. So I'll do that then. And then as we can see, we got some greenish oil right there. That actually seems to come from the AC compressor, so I think the actual AC compressor is leaking a bit as well. And if you remember, we did have a code regarding the AC system with the pressure. So yeah, might need to buy another AC compressor or rebuild this one. As we can see, both of the drive belts are completely dry and rotted out, so definitely need to replace those as well as the tensioners and idler pulley real soon. No leaks from this side of the engine though, so that's really nice, means that we probably don't have a rear main seal leak. I did go ahead and bend and pry on all of the bushings and control arms here in the front, and nothing seemed out of place really. The bushings are all intact. The only play that I found was, as I said, in the anti-roll bar link. As far as the rear axle goes, yes, it is rusty, but it's mostly just surface rust, and always with cars like this, it usually looks a lot worse than it actually is, especially when you don't have any undercoating or anything like that. Just keep in mind, every used car of this age and mileage looks like this in Sweden. Although intact, the springs are quite rusty. The shock absorbers, they don't look new by any means. I mean, they're not leaking like they did in the front, but it might not be a bad idea to replace them as well if I'm doing the fronts. And as I said, the springs are intact, but when they are rusty like this, they are weaker and more prone to cracking and breaking because the rusts act like a weak spot, and stress concentrations can form where you have rust pitting and stuff like that. So when they are old and rusty like this, it's just a matter of time before they snap and break completely. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and order new rear springs as well. I did go ahead and pry and check for looseness in all of the control arms and trailing arms and bushings in the rear. They actually seem pretty okay. One really common issue with pretty much all Volvos of this generation is the trailing arm bushes right there, as we can see. They are very common to break. They actually separate, the rubber separates from the metal casing. I did go ahead and feel these, pried them side to side and in and out. I have definitely felt worse. The right side has a little bit of wear. The left one actually felt pretty good, honestly. The right side has a little bit of play, so might go ahead and replace that as well. But as I said, I have definitely felt way worse on other Volvos, so I might just leave them alone because it is quite an involved job. And if I go ahead and tackle them, I mean, it's tempting to just drop the entire subframe, change every single arm, sandblast the subframe and powder coat that with new springs and new dampers. So basically a full rear end restoration, and that's also the perfect opportunity to scrape away any loose rust and rust treat everything underneath as well. The rear brakes does look pretty sorry for themselves. I mean, there's still some material left. You could probably squeeze a couple of more years out of these rear brakes as well. They are functioning fine, but I figured it's just best to go ahead and replace the pads and rotors here because they are towards the end of their life. So yeah, but in the front, it's a different story. I'm definitely not going to replace the pads and rotors. You're gonna see why later on. It's gonna make sense, I promise. But yeah, in the rear, at least, pads and rotors. Luckily, the right front fender is in good condition. It's only the left one that's really rusty like this for some reason, so need to order a new front fender. But luckily, as I said, it's only one and not two, so half the price there. And then I'm probably gonna just leave it to a professional company to repaint it, because I've tried to repaint in the past, and I mean, you can achieve okay results, but you can't really compare it to when you leave it to a professional paint shop. So a new front fender is ordered, and I'm gonna be putting that on when the time comes to do a full detail on this car, because the paint on all of the other panels are in pretty rough condition, a lot of scratches, and the paint just looks dull and ugly, so definitely in need of a full detail. And as we can see, the front headlights are pretty cloudy and oxidized, so I need to restore these as well. And obviously the wheels are completely shot, or should I rather say the tires. I mean, these aren't even legal anymore, so I actually gone ahead and went to Stockholm yesterday and bought a complete new or used set of winter tires that are in much better condition than this. And of course, a lot of more things will come up once you start to work on the car, an old car like this. So there's a lot more content in stored on this car, I promise you that. But for this episode, the goal is to just get it road-worthy, and so that I'm comfortable driving it on the roads. Because I'm actually gonna borrow out this car to a friend of mine who just got his driver's license, so he gets to feel how it is to have his own car, basically. So I'm gonna lend it out to him for a couple of weeks. During that time, I will actually start to work on the micro again, because I have a lot of stuff that I want to do to it. I want to take it to the next step. So for those of you who don't know, this is my little casual track car, like a track day car racer. So yeah, I have a lot of things I want to do to this. For example, build a roll cage and stuff like that. So super excited for that. I have the parts, they've just been sitting around. So I'm really eager to start to work on this car again. But for now, enough talking, let's get to work and start wrenching on this car.
Big thanks to Vparts for helping out with this project. Definitely my go-to site when it comes to Volvo parts. They ship to other countries outside of Sweden as well, so make sure to check them out. Link is in the description. The absolute first thing I like to do with a new project car is to soak any fastener down that I might need to remove in the future with some penetrant. First order of business is to replace the broken inner drive axle boot. Hopefully the joint itself is salvageable. I always find nuts and bolts to be extremely tight on there whenever I work on an old Volvo, and this car was no exception. Luckily, my induction heater came in clutch many times in this video.
This tool right here is a lifesaver, one of the best tools money can buy if you want to save the nuts and bolts that you're working on and just make your life so much easier. This is a Chinese version, but they still do the job and they have become much cheaper over the last couple of years. So highly recommend to get an induction heater.
Right here I'm just loosening the main bolt for the control arm a couple of threads. This makes it much easier to pry the lower ball joint out of the way. Also, it doesn't put as much strain on the bushing when doing so. Just remember to tighten it back up again at normal ride height when you're done. The drive axles on these gearboxes are known to be extremely stubborn and there isn't really any good spot to pry against. The axle seal isn't leaking, so I decided to just leave the innermost part of the axle still in the gearbox and put a new boot over it when the time comes for reassembly. The outer boot and joints seem to be in good shape, so I decided to leave that alone.
So guys, this is how the new boot looks, and this is how the old original one looks. Clearly this won't work because as we can see right here, we got straight edges. These ones are rounded off, so this won't work. So I've actually gone ahead and emailed Volvo directly and placed an order of an OEM drive axle boot, but it's the weekend right now, so I'm gonna have to wait until next week until that arrives. But until then, let's go ahead and proceed with something else, and that is the front struts. So let's go ahead and tackle that right now.
I opted for complete strut assemblies that you can find on Vpart, and as we're gonna see a bit later on, it turned out to be the right call. Unfortunately, the screw that holds down the leveling sensor snapped, so I'll have to take care of that somehow. I'm not going to be able to hang the caliper up on the strut since we're going to remove that, so I simply hung it up on the brake line bracket instead. And this is when things went really south. Now the pinch bolt for the strut can be really tight on there, but this one was properly seized and broke rather easily. This was the last thing I wanted to happen, but sometimes things doesn't always go your way, so let's just continue and figure it out. And that was the sound of my 1/4-inch ratchet finally throwing in the towel. Oh well, I've had it for like 10 years, so I guess I can't be too disappointed about it. Now, whoever came up with the idea of using 8mm bolt heads for the brake shield should be fired. 1 out of 3 screws managed to come out with a normal socket. For the rest of them, I needed to use an extractor. Alright, so the entire assembly is out with the complete strut, spindle and wheel bearing and all of that good stuff. And as we can see right here, the spring was actually broken, which I totally missed when it was on the car because couldn't see it underneath all of that oil, dirt and grease that has been collecting here. But yeah, the spring is broken, so really good thing that I decided to buy a complete strut assembly. And as far as this broken bolt goes, I'll try to save the threads on the spindle the best that I can. So I'm gonna try to drill in the center of the bolt and then extract it with an extractor. But it'll be far easier now once it's outside the car to deal with this problem. Well, that's the last thing you want to happen. The extractor broke inside the bolt. No drilling that out. I just realized before proceeding, at least I should see if the ABS sensor can come out successfully, because remember, we did have a fault code for the right front ABS sensor. And of course, the sensor broke off at the base, but as the sensor is mostly made out of plastic, it shouldn't be too difficult to drill it out. As far as the broken bolt goes, I did manage to drill out the threaded portion until it was just a thin walled screw left, but I couldn't get it to break loose. The shank with the broken extractor, I did however manage to get that out, so I decided to drill out the threaded part completely and re-tap the hole.
So all of that work you just saw was pretty much in vain, because the threads for the pinch bolt did take some damage on the old spindle right here. Maybe it still would be fine, but I think the threads are compromised and it just doesn't feel right to reuse that one in that state. So I just went ahead and bought a complete new spindle, or an old spindle I should say, but this one is from low mileage Volvo S40, but I'm still gonna go ahead and change out the wheel bearing because you don't know how it's been stored, etc. But yeah, it basically got no rust on the brake shield, so this is definitely from low mileage Volvo. Flashback to when I was doing the Volvo XC60 project, I ended up needing to buy another spindle for that car as well. I don't know what it's about with these old Volvos and everything being just super seized on them. But yeah, I guess that's the way it goes. So new spindle. Gonna prepare that one for reassembly, so let's go.
You need to have the special tool for this kind of bearing and hub design that Volvo and Ford uses, otherwise you need to press it out and in on the inner race, and that is a no-go when it comes to installing bearings that has a press fit between the outer race and the bore of the spindle. Now, since this spindle is in such good shape already, why not go ahead and clean it off and give it some fresh paint? Being that it was from such a low mileage car, even the brake shield was in really good condition, so I cleaned off any surface rust, degreased it and painted that as well. Really important to make sure that the new bearing is pressed in all the way and sits flush and true. If you're doing this yourself, please make sure to apply anti-seize on the shank of the bolt. The mechanic community will thank you. I'm just sapping it down right here with the lowest setting on the impact gun, and then I'll torque it down properly when it's on the car. As we've just experienced, these wheel speed sensors have a terrible tendency to get stuck in the bore, so it's really important to clean all of the mating surfaces for the sensor and apply some anti-seize. The bolts for the top mounts were in really rough shape and even pitted by the rust, so I bought 6 new ones directly from Volvo. This surface comes in contact with the seal on the backside of the wheel bearing, so really important to clean it off and apply some grease there. The bolts for the drive axles are one-time use as per the official instructions from Volvo. Three new stainless steel screws to hold down the brake shield. And of course we need to clean both sides of the flange on the brake disc before remounting it on the brand new hub. Speaking of the front brakes, these are actually original Volvo brake discs and pads in really good condition. So the previous owner must have cared for the car at least, so that means I'm absolutely not going to replace the pads and rotors in the front. I fixed the snapped screw for the level sensor by drilling out what was remaining of the broken screw, as well as the riv nut that was installed from factory, and simply installed a new one with the same thread size. Almost forgot, I need to replace the anti-roll bar link as well, so let's do that now. The left side went super smoothly, no drilling or extracting required. Just got the new CV boot from Volvo, so let's go ahead and install that while we have some wiggle room to get the axle in. Couldn't resist, so I bought a new brake shield for the left side as well, but this came in silver, so let's go ahead and paint it black to match the other side.
So I'm finally done with the front suspension, at least for now. So let's go ahead and proceed with the next thing, and that is the oil filter housing, the complete unit with the built-in PCV system. Because I was actually poking around a little bit in there, and just by touching one of the hoses that led up to the oil filter housing, it just broke. It just crumbled off, super old and brittle. And when that happened, I also had a glimpse inside of the oil filter housing, and it was really dirty, very sludged up, a lot of carbon buildup. So I figured instead of just go ahead and replacing the hose that goes to it, I figured it's probably not a bad idea to replace the complete housing, because inside of here there's actually a membrane that controls the pressure inside of the crankcase. So it actually fills a really important function, and also the passageways in here for the oil are probably pretty carboned and sludged up. So definitely not a bad idea to replace the entire unit. It's actually a very common fault on these Volvos that the membrane fails and you will have either too little or too high crankcase pressure. And that can also lead to leaks, which I definitely have right here. So maybe the leaking will stop just by replacing this. Otherwise, I'll have to go ahead and replace the seals as well. But yeah, definitely gonna go ahead and replace this one right now. So let's do that right now.
But just before we do that, let's just quickly go ahead and swap out the old oil for some new cheap oil together with some oil flush additive. Otherwise, the new filter housing is just going to get filled with old dirty oil. I just bought the cheapest oil I could find at the store, since I'm only going to run it to operating temperature and then change it again to a good quality full synthetic oil. And while we're on the subject of flushing things, let's also go ahead and drain the cooling system and fill it up with distilled water and some coolant flush additive. In order to gain access to the filter housing, we first need to remove the air intake.
Well, that was by far the worst intake box I've ever removed. I needed to undo the rear motor mount, lift the engine quite a bit, used a lot of silicone spray, but it was still a really big struggle. But I managed to get it out in one piece. I didn't break off any of the tabs or anything, so that's good. And as we can see, now we have much better access to the old oil filter housing and the hoses running up to it. However, since this hose seems to be running in between or underneath the intake manifold, it seems like I have to remove that one as well. But this one is actually much easier than the intake box, so let's go ahead and remove the plastic intake manifold as well.
Before removing the oil filter housing, it's important to clean around the edges so that dirt doesn't fall into the passageways on the engine block when opening it up. Let's go ahead and also clean this area and most importantly prep the sealing surfaces. And if we just clean that, why not make the engine bay look a little bit more presentable and nicer to work with? The mating surface where the plastic intake manifold mounts to was in really rough shape, so let's get rid of all of the oxide and lightly sand it to a flat, clean surface for the intake to seal to. There we go, a tiny bit better, but when the beauty covers goes back on, it'll look like a nice engine bay for sure.
If we compare the old oil filter housing to the new one, you can see right here that we have a couple of threaded holes, one right here and one right there. But on the new one we just have normal blind holes without any threads. And this is completely normal because the idea is that the screws that belongs there are this triangular shape, so they actually bite into the material and create its own threads in the aluminium casting. And obviously it's easier to do now than on the car, so let's go ahead and thread these fasteners in, and hopefully we will create some good threads in there. Alright guys, that's the oil filter housing with the integrated PCV system done, and I thought while we're in here, why not go ahead and replace this thermostat, because as we can see it sits in a plastic housing and we all know that plastic gets brittle with time, so the best opportunity to replace this is now. So I've got a new thermostat right here, complete with the housing and everything, but you're gonna have to see that and a lot more other work on this car because we are far from done. I know I said in the beginning that the goal with this video was to get it roadworthy and be able to tackle the roads, but yeah, more work than I anticipated for sure, and it's always like that with project cars like this. I just discover more stuff as I go basically. The more I touch, the more I discover that needs to be replaced or refurbished or whatever, taken care of. And if you think about it, I haven't even begun diagnosing the no heat issue in the car, so I'm gonna be doing that in the next episode once I button everything up here, or actually before I do that, because I'm actually going to flow test the cooling system and see if there's any leak and see if the flow is good through the heat matrix inside, and a lot more good stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna have to end it here. This video is probably pretty long as it is right now, so I will see you in the next episode. Hopefully it will drop pretty shortly here. So thank you so much guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. See you in the next one.